The gunshot echoed across the vast plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876, startling a flock of birds into flight as Nathaniel Lee slumped against a boulder, blood seeping through her fingers pressed against her side. Her faithful horse Blaze, now lying motionless 20 feet away, had taken the first bullet meant for her. The second had found its mark in her flesh, turning what should have been a routine journey to her father's ranch into a desperate fight for survival. The relentless summer sun beat down on the arid landscape as Nathaniel's vision blurred. She had been ambushed by men she recognized as working for Victor Holloway, the ruthless cattle baron who had been trying to force her father off his land for the past year. They had shot her horse from beneath her and left her for dead in this desolate stretch of prairie, miles from the nearest homestead. Her thoughts drifted to her father, waiting for her return with the medicine she carried in her saddlebags. At 58, Jonathan Lee had fallen ill with a fever that had kept him bedridden for nearly a week. As consciousness began to slip away, Nathaniel fought to stay awake, knowing that surrendering to the darkness meant certain death for them both. Griffin Foster spotted the body of the horse from half a mile away. He'd been tracking a small herd of Mustangs across the territory, hoping to break a few for selling at the next county fair. Instead, he found himself steering his stallion Thunder toward what looked like trouble. As he drew closer, he noticed a figure crumpled nearby and spurred his horse faster. Dismounting in a fluid motion, Griffin knelt beside the young woman. Her chestnut hair had partially come loose from its braid, and dust covered her simple riding clothes. Blood had soaked through her shirt at the waist, and her breathing was shallow. He gently turned her face toward him, noting her delicate features now pale with blood loss. "Miss, can you hear me?" Griffin asked, pressing his bandana against her wound to slow the bleeding. Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer sage. "My horse," she whispered. "Dead, I'm afraid," Griffin replied, already assessing the severity of her injury. "Looks like you took a bullet yourself. Who did this to you?" "Holloway's men," she managed before her eyes started to roll back. Griffin took her face in his hands, his voice firm. "Don't you dare give up on me now. You hear me? Stay awake." Something in his commanding tone pulled Nathaniel back from the brink. She focused on his face, weather beaten and tanned beneath his hat, with earnest blue eyes that held both concern and determination. "My father needs medicine," she whispered, gesturing weakly toward her fallen horse. "In the saddlebags." Griffin nodded, understanding the urgency. "I'll get you both to safety, but first I need to stop this bleeding." "Where were you headed?" "Lee Ranch, 5 miles east of Copper Creek." Working quickly, Griffin fashioned a proper bandage from strips of his spare shirt. The wound appeared to be a graze rather than a direct hit, but she had lost a considerable amount of blood. After retrieving the medicine from the dead horse's saddlebags, he carefully lifted Nathaniel onto Thunder. "Hold on to me," he instructed as he mounted behind her, securing her against his chest. "We'll get you home." Nathaniel leaned back against the stranger's solid frame, finding an unexpected comfort in the arms of a man she didn't know. "Thank you," she murmured, fighting to stay conscious as the horse began to move. "I'm Nathaniel Lee, Griffin Foster," he replied, guiding his horse eastward. "Unusual name for a lady." Despite her pain, Nathaniel managed a weak smile. "My father wanted a son." The journey to the Lee Ranch was arduous. Every jolt sent pain shooting through Nathaniel's side, but Griffin kept a steady pace, occasionally speaking to her to ensure she remained conscious. He told her he was a horse trainer who had come to Wyoming from Texas 2 years prior, seeking opportunity in the expanding Western territories. "What about you?" he asked, hoping conversation would keep her alert. "Born and raised here, born in Missouri," she replied, her voice strained. "Father moved us here when I was 12 after Mother died. Said the open country would heal our hearts." Griffin nodded, understanding all too well the allure of a fresh start. "Did it work?" "Most days," Nathaniel answered honestly, "though some wounds never fully heal." As they crested a hill, a modest ranch came into view, a main house with a broad porch, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating someone was home. "That's it?" Griffin asked. Nathaniel nodded weakly. "That's home." They were met at the property line by a ranch hand who immediately recognized Nathaniel. "Miss Lee," the young man exclaimed, running alongside them as Griffin guided Thunder toward the house. "We've been worried sick. Your father's been asking for you." "Fetch the doctor from town," Griffin instructed. "She's been shot." The ranch hand's eyes widened before he nodded and ran for the stables. Minutes later, Griffin carried Nathaniel into the house, following the housekeeper's directions to her bedroom. The older woman gasped at the sight of blood but quickly recovered her composure. "Her father's ill in the next room," the housekeeper explained, pulling back the covers on Nathaniel's bed. "Fever's had him down for days." Griffin gently laid Nathaniel on the bed. She mentioned medicine for him. "It's in her saddlebags." He handed them to the housekeeper. "I'll stay with her until the doctor arrives." Left alone with Nathaniel, Griffin checked her bandage, which had soaked through during the ride. He replaced it with clean linens from her dresser, trying to maintain her modesty while attending to her wound. "You're quite handy with bandages," Nathaniel observed, her voice barely audible. "Served in the war," Griffin replied simply. "Learned a thing or two about patching up wounds." Nathaniel studied him through half-lidded eyes. "Which side?" "Union," he answered. "Though I reckon that hardly matters now." A small smile touched her lips. "My father would disagree, but I'm inclined to think you're right." The door opened as the housekeeper returned. "Mr. Lee is asking for his daughter. I gave him the medicine, but he's fretting something fierce." Griffin looked to Nathaniel, who attempted to sit up. "Whoa there," he cautioned, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're in no condition to be moving about." "He needs to know I'm all right," Nathaniel insisted. After a moment's consideration, Griffin nodded. "I'll carry you in to see him, but just for a moment." Jonathan Lee was a shadow of the robust rancher he once had been. The fever had hollowed his cheeks and dulled his eyes, but they lit up with relief at the sight of his daughter. Griffin placed Nathaniel carefully in a chair beside her father's bed. "Nat," Jonathan rasped, reaching for her hand. "They told me you were hurt." "Nothing serious, father," she assured him, though the paleness of her face betrayed the lie. "I got your medicine." Jonathan's gaze shifted to Griffin, standing protectively behind Nathaniel's chair. "And who might you be, young man?" "Griffin Foster, sir." "I found your daughter on the plains after she'd been attacked." The older man's expression darkened. "Attacked? By whom?" "Holloway's men," Nathaniel answered before Griffin could speak. "They shot Blaze from under me." Fury flickered across Jonathan's face. "That bastard won't be satisfied until he's run us all out of the territory." "We can discuss Holloway later," Griffin interjected, noticing Nathaniel swaying slightly in her seat. "Your daughter needs rest." As if on cue, the doctor arrived, shooing everyone from the room as he examined Nathaniel. Griffin paced the hallway until the physician emerged with a guarded expression. "The bullet grazed her side," he explained. "I've cleaned and stitched the wound. She's lucky an inch to the right and we'd be planning a funeral." Griffin's jaw tightened at the thought. "Will she recover?" "With proper rest and care to prevent infection, yes, she's young and strong." The doctor glanced toward Jonathan's room. "Her father's another matter. That fever has weakened his heart. The medicine will help, but he needs constant attention." After the doctor departed, Griffin found himself at a crossroads. The responsible thing would be to continue on his way. He had mustangs to catch and a living to earn. Yet something about Nathaniel Lee pulled at him, a woman he had known for mere hours. The housekeeper approached him as he stood contemplating near the front door. "Mr. Foster, I've prepared a room for you. Miss Lee insisted you stay the night at least." Griffin nodded his thanks. "I'll tend to my horse first." In the barn, Griffin unsaddled Thunder and rubbed him down, his mind on the young woman in the house. There was a quiet strength about her that he admired. Riding alone through dangerous territory to fetch medicine for her father spoke of both courage and devotion. He was interrupted by the arrival of the ranch foreman, a weathered man named Carl Jenkins. "Heard what you did for Miss Lee," he said, extending a calloused hand. "We're obliged to you." Griffin shook the offered hand. Anyone would have done the same. "Not in these parts," Jenkins replied grimly. "Holloway's got half the territory intimidated. Folks look the other way rather than cross him." "What's his quarrel with the Lees?" Griffin asked, curiosity piqued. Jenkins leaned against a stall door. "Water rights primarily. The Lee property controls access to the best stream in the area. Holloway wants it, but Jonathan refuses to sell. Been a feud brewing for months now. Seems like a matter for the law." A bitter laugh escaped Jenkins. "Sheriff's in Holloway's pocket. We're on our own out here." The conversation left Griffin troubled as he returned to the house. The situation was more complicated than he had initially realized, and he found himself reluctant to leave Nathaniel and her father vulnerable to further attacks. Over the next few days, Griffin made himself useful around the ranch, helping with chores and keeping watch for any sign of Holloway's men. Nathaniel regained her strength gradually, though she remained confined to bed on doctor's orders. On the third evening, Griffin brought her dinner on a tray, finding her sitting up against her pillows with a book open on her lap. "You look better," he observed, setting the tray on the bedside table. Nathaniel marked her place in the book. "I feel better. Restless, but better." Griffin smiled, noting the color had returned to her cheeks. "The doctor says another day or two of rest and you can start moving around the house." "Another day or two of this room and I might lose my mind," she complained, though her eyes held a playful spark that Griffin found increasingly captivating. He gestured to the book. "What are you reading?" "Poetry, Whitman." She passed him the volume. "Do you read much, Mr. Foster?" "Griffin, please," he corrected, flipping through the pages. "And yes, when I can, though I prefer tales of adventure to poetry." Nathaniel studied him. "You're not what I expected a cowboy to be." "Is that what I am, a cowboy?" Griffin returned the book with an amused expression. "And what did you expect? Someone rougher around the edges, less thoughtful." Their eyes met and something shifted in the air between them. Griffin cleared his throat. "Your father asked to see you after you've eaten. He's doing much better today." Jonathan Lee had indeed improved, sitting up in his bed when Griffin escorted Nathaniel to his room later that evening. Though still weak, the older man's eyes were clear as he observed his daughter leaning on Griffin's arm for support. "You two seem to have become acquainted," Jonathan remarked with a hint of fatherly scrutiny. Nathaniel eased into a chair. "Mr. Foster has been very kind during my recovery. Kind enough that I'd like to offer him a job," Jonathan said, surprising them both. "We could use a man with his skills, especially now that Holloway's shown he's willing to resort to violence." Griffin hesitated. He hadn't planned on staying, yet the offer tempted him. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Lee, but I have commitments. Mustang hunting can wait," Jonathan interrupted knowingly. "I'll match whatever you'd make selling those horses, plus room and board." Nathaniel looked up at Griffin, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to stay on our account." But Griffin found himself nodding. "I'll stay through the summer at least, see you both back on your feet properly." That night, unable to sleep, Griffin stepped onto the porch to find Nathaniel already there, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm evening. She had clearly disobeyed the doctor's orders to remain in bed. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, joining her at the railing. She shook her head. "Too many thoughts. Father told me you agreed to stay on." "Is that all right with you?" Nathaniel turned to face him, her features softened by moonlight. "More than all right. I haven't properly thanked you for saving my life." "No thanks necessary," Griffin assured her. "Though I admit I'm curious about something. What were you doing riding alone, knowing Holloway's men were causing trouble?" A shadow crossed her face. "Father was too ill to go himself, and our regular ranch hands were moving cattle to the north pasture. I didn't think. I never imagined they'd actually shoot a woman." "Men like that don't see women or men, just obstacles," Griffin said grimly. "Promise me you won't take such risks again." The request was presumptuous given their short acquaintance, but Nathaniel didn't seem to mind. I promise, though only if you'll teach me to shoot properly. I had my father's revolver with me, but I never got the chance to use it. Griffin raised an eyebrow. Your father allows you to carry a gun. My father recognizes that a woman alone in these territories needs protection, she replied with a hint of defiance. Will you teach me or not? I will, Griffin agreed after a moment, though I suspect your father might have something to say about it. Nathaniel's smile held a mischievous quality. What father doesn't know won't trouble him. As summer progressed, Griffin found himself increasingly drawn into the Lee family's world. He worked alongside the ranch hands during the day, impressing even the most seasoned cowboys with his skill with horses. In the evenings, he often shared dinner with Nathaniel and her father, who had gradually regained his strength. True to his word, Griffin began teaching Nathaniel to shoot. They practiced at dawn in a secluded corner of the property where the sound wouldn't carry to the main house. She proved to be a natural, her aim improving rapidly under his instruction. You're getting good, Griffin remarked one morning as Nathaniel hit 5 bottles in succession. Keep this up and you'll outshoot half the men in the territory. Nathaniel lowered the revolver, pleased with her progress. Only half, Griffin laughed. Give it time, you might manage 2/3 eventually. Their lessons had become something more than simple instruction. Griffin found himself looking forward to these quiet mornings with Nathaniel, watching the sunrise paint her features in gold as she concentrated on her target. They talked during these sessions, really talked about their pasts, their dreams, the books they'd read. Griffin learned that Nathaniel had been educated in St. Louis before her mother's death, that she loved music but couldn't carry a tune, and that despite her father's protests, she participated in most aspects of running the ranch. In turn, he shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time in the war, and his wanderings afterward, seeking a place that felt like home. Have you found it yet? Nathaniel asked one morning as they walked back to the house. A place that feels like home. Griffin considered the question seriously. I'm not sure. Sometimes I think home isn't a place so much as a feeling. What kind of feeling? Like you're exactly where you're meant to be, he replied, his eyes meeting hers. With the people you're meant to be with. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibility, until the dinner bell rang from the main house, breaking the spell. The peaceful routine was shattered 2 weeks later when Griffin and several ranch hands returned from the north pasture to find 3 of Holloway's men at the main house. They stood on the porch facing Jonathan, with Nathaniel positioned protectively at her father's side. Griffin dismounted quickly, hand resting on the revolver at his hip as he approached. The tension in the air was palpable. Everything all right here? He asked, coming to stand beside Nathaniel. Mr. Foster, Jonathan acknowledged with a nod. These gentlemen were just leaving. The largest of the 3 men whom Griffin recognized as Holloway's foreman, Sam Drake, smiled unpleasantly. We were extending an invitation to Mr. Holloway's summer social. He specifically requested the presence of Miss Lee. Nathaniel's expression remained neutral, but Griffin felt her stiffen beside him. Please tell Mr. Holloway I'm otherwise engaged, she replied coolly. Drake's smile didn't waver. He'll be disappointed. He's quite taken with you, miss. My daughter has declined, Jonathan stated firmly. Now I suggest you gentlemen be on your way. The men retreated to their horses, but Drake lingered a moment longer. Mr. Holloway also wanted me to remind you that his offer to purchase your water rights still stands. It would be a shame if something were to happen to your herd before winter. The threat hung in the air as the men rode away. Once they were out of earshot, Jonathan turned to Griffin. I want extra men watching the herd tonight. Holloway's not one for idle threats. Griffin nodded, but his attention was on Nathaniel, whose composed facade had cracked once the men departed. What did he mean, Holloway's taken with you? Victor Holloway fancies himself a gentleman rancher, Jonathan explained when Nathaniel remained silent. He's been widowed 2 years and has apparently set his sights on my daughter as a potential bride. Griffin felt an unexpected surge of jealousy. And how do you feel about that? he asked Nathaniel directly, her eyes flashed with indignation. I'd sooner marry a rattlesnake. The man is old enough to be my father, not to mention cruel and dishonest. Relief washed over Griffin, followed by concern. If you've rejected him, that might explain the escalation in hostilities. All the more reason to stay vigilant, Jonathan agreed grimly. That night, Griffin took the first watch at the northern boundary of the property. The moon was high, casting silver light across the landscape as he patrolled on horseback. His mind kept returning to Nathaniel and the protective instinct she awakened in him. It was more than concern for her safety. In the weeks since he'd found her wounded on the plains, she had become important to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. A distant glimmer caught his attention, light reflecting off metal, perhaps. Griffin tensed, scanning the horizon. The sound of hoofbeats confirmed his suspicions. Riders approaching from the north, at least 6 of them. Griffin spurred Thunder back toward the ranch, intent on raising the alarm. He had nearly reached the property line when gunfire erupted behind him. A bullet whizzed past his ear as he urged his horse faster, another striking the ground near Thunder's hooves. The ranch hands were already alerted by the gunfire, emerging from the bunkhouse with rifles as Griffin galloped into the yard. "Holloway's men," he shouted. 6, maybe more, coming from the north. Jonathan appeared on the porch, shotgun in hand, with Nathaniel close behind. She was dressed in riding clothes, her father's revolver holstered at her hip. "Get inside," Griffin called to her as he dismounted. Nathaniel shook her head. "This is my home." "I'll defend it." There was no time to argue. The raiders had reached the edge of the property, setting fire to the dry grass as they approached. The flames spread quickly, creating a diversion as Holloway's men charged toward the main house, the barn. Jonathan yelled, noticing flames licking at its wooden walls where a burning arrow had struck. "The horses," Griffin made a split-second decision. "I'll get the horses, you defend the house." He raced toward the barn, Nathaniel following despite his instructions to stay back. Inside, the horses were panicking, rearing and whinnying as smoke began to fill the space. Griffin moved quickly from stall to stall, freeing the animals while Nathaniel grabbed buckets, attempting to douse the growing flames. "It's spreading too fast," she called, coughing as smoke thickened around them. "We need to get out." Griffin had just released the last horse when a burning beam crashed down behind them, blocking their exit. The heat was intense, the smoke nearly blinding as he searched for another way out. The back door. Nathaniel pointed through the haze. "This way." They stumbled toward the rear of the barn, the roar of the fire nearly drowning out the sounds of the gunfight continuing outside. Griffin pushed the door open, pulling Nathaniel through just as another section of the roof collapsed where they had been standing moments before. Outside, the scene was chaos. Ranch hands exchanged fire with Holloway's men from positions around the property. The main house remained secure, but the barn was now fully engulfed in flames, lighting up the night sky. "We need to help them," Nathaniel insisted, drawing her revolver. Griffin caught her arm. "Your father would never forgive me if anything happened to you. Stay behind cover." Before she could respond, a shot rang out from their left. Griffin felt a searing pain in his shoulder as the bullet struck him. He stumbled, and Nathaniel caught him, dragging him behind a water trough as more bullets splintered the wood around them. "You're hit," she said, her voice tight with fear as she pressed her hand against his wound. Griffin gritted his teeth against the pain. "Just a graze, I'll be fine." But it was more than a graze, and they both knew it. Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and sticky beneath Nathaniel's fingers. She tore a strip from her own shirt, binding his shoulder tightly. "Just like I found you," Griffin managed, attempting a smile through his pain. "Don't you dare give up on me now," she whispered fiercely, echoing his words from weeks ago. "We're going to get through this." The gunfire gradually subsided as dawn approached. Holloway's men, having done considerable damage but failed to take the ranch, retreated across the plains. The barn was a smoldering ruin, but the house stood intact and miraculously, no one had been killed. The doctor arrived mid-morning to treat the injured, including Griffin, whose shoulder wound required several stitches. Nathaniel refused to leave his side during the procedure, her hand tight around his as the needle pierced his flesh. "You'll have a fine scar to show for your heroics," the doctor remarked as he finished, "but you'll heal clean if infection doesn't set in." Nathaniel saw the doctor out while Griffin rested in the guest room that had become his over the summer. When she returned, she sat gently on the edge of his bed. "Father says Holloway won't stop," she said quietly. "Last night was just the beginning." Griffin reached for her hand with his good arm. "Then we'll be ready for him." "No," Nathaniel shook her head. "Not we." "This isn't your fight, Griffin. You've done more than enough already." "It became my fight the moment I found you on that plane," he replied, his voice stronger than he felt. "I'm not going anywhere, Nathaniel." She looked down at their intertwined fingers. Why risk your life for us for me?" "You barely know me." Griffin considered his answer carefully. "I think I knew you the moment I saw you, not the details of your life, but who you are, your spirit, your heart." Color rose in Nathaniel's cheeks. "Griffin, let me finish," he insisted gently. "I've wandered since the war ended, never staying in one place too long. But these past weeks, for the first time in years, I've felt like I found somewhere I belong, someone I belong with." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nathaniel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I feel it too," she whispered. "This connection between us, it terrifies me sometimes how quickly it happened." Griffin lifted his hand to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Does it terrify you enough to send me away?" Nathaniel leaned into his touch. "No. What terrifies me is the thought of losing you." Their first kiss was gentle, mindful of Griffin's injury, yet filled with the promise of deeper passion. When they parted, Nathaniel rested her forehead against his, both breathless from more than the kiss. "You should rest," she said eventually, reluctantly pulling away. "Doctor's orders." Griffin caught her hand as she stood. "Stay with me, just until I fall asleep." Nathaniel smiled, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I'll be here when you wake." In the days that followed, the ranch prepared for another attack. Jonathan sent telegrams to neighboring ranches, calling in favors and building alliances against Holloway's intimidation. Men arrived from across the territory, ranchers who had suffered similar threats and were ready to make a stand. Griffin, despite his injury, insisted on participating in the defense plans. His military experience proved valuable as they fortified the property and established a patrol schedule. Throughout it all, his relationship with Nathaniel deepened, their stolen moments together becoming precious amid the tension. One evening, a week after the raid, they walked along the creek that had become the center of the dispute with Holloway. The water reflected the sunset as they sat on a fallen log, Griffin's arm around Nathaniel's shoulders. "My mother would have liked you," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. "She always said I needed someone who could match my stubbornness." Griffin chuckled. "Smart woman." "What about your father? How does he feel about us?" Nathaniel smiled. "He pretends to be gruff about it, but I've seen him watching you. He respects you, Griffin. That's not something he gives easily. And if I were to ask for more than his respect, if I were to ask for his blessing?" The question caused Nathaniel to pull back slightly, searching his face. "Griffin Foster, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," he replied honestly. "But I want you to know that's where my heart is heading, when this business with Holloway is settled, when your father is fully recovered. I want to build a life with you, Nathaniel." She leaned forward to kiss him, a gesture that conveyed her answer more eloquently than words. When they parted, she whispered, "I want that too, more than anything." Their moment of peace was shattered by the distant sound of a warning shot the signal from their outermost patrol that riders were approaching. They rushed back to the ranch, where Jonathan was already organizing the defense. "Holloway himself is with them this time," the lookout reported, breathless from his hard ride. "At least 20 men, all armed." Jonathan turned to Griffin. "Get everyone in position. If it's a fight they want, it's a fight they'll get." Nathaniel retrieved her revolver from the house, checking it was fully loaded before joining the men at the barricade they'd constructed. Griffin gave her a concerned look, but knew better than to suggest she stay inside. "Stay low," he instructed instead. "And remember what I taught you." The riders approached slowly, more confident than during their night raid. Victor Holloway led the group, a tall man in his 50s with silver at his temples and cold eyes that surveyed the ranch with open disdain. He reined in his horse just beyond rifle range. "Lee," he called. "I've come to settle this matter once and for all." Jonathan stepped forward, rifle in hand. "There's nothing to settle, Holloway. This land is mine, legally deeded and paid for. The water rights come with it." "I've offered you fair compensation," Holloway countered. "More than this patch of dirt is worth, yet you persist in this foolish defiance." Griffin moved to stand beside Jonathan, his own rifle ready despite the pain in his shoulder. "You call shooting an unarmed woman fair, burning a man's barn in the night?" Holloway's gaze shifted to Griffin, then to Nathaniel, who had taken position on her father's other side. "Ah, the mysterious Mr. Foster. I've heard about you. Drifter turned hero turned, what, suitor to the fair Miss Lee." "My personal affairs are none of your concern," Nathaniel replied coldly. "Nor will they ever be." A flash of anger crossed Holloway's face before he composed himself. "I've come with a final offer, Lee. Sell me the water rights and I'll leave your ranch intact." "Refuse and I can't guarantee your safety or your daughter's." "You're outnumbered, Holloway," Jonathan gestured to the men positioned around the property. "And these folks have had enough of your bullying tactics. This ends today." Holloway seemed to notice the additional defenders for the first time, his confidence wavering slightly. But rather than retreat, he pulled a document from his coat. "I had hoped to avoid this unpleasantness," he said, unfolding the paper, "but you leave me no choice. I have here an eviction notice signed by Judge Reynolds himself. It seems there are irregularities with your deed." Jonathan's face paled. "That's impossible. My deed is legitimate." The judge disagrees. "You have 48 hours to vacate the property." Griffin exchanged a glance with Nathaniel, who looked as shocked as her father. "This is a trick," Griffin said quietly to them. "He's bluffing." "Even if he has a paper with Reynolds' signature, it doesn't make it legal," Jonathan agreed, finding his resolve. "Reynolds is in Holloway's pocket. This won't stand in a proper court. Unfortunately, Judge Reynolds is the only legal authority for 100 miles, Holloway called, having overheard their exchange. "His word is law in this territory." The standoff continued, tension building as neither side yielded. Just as it seemed violence was inevitable, the sound of approaching riders drew everyone's attention. A group of men in dusty trail clothes appeared from the east, led by a figure in a marshal's coat. "What's going on here?" the marshal demanded as he rode between the two groups. Holloway's expression soured. "Marshal Davis, I wasn't aware you were in the territory." "Just arrived from Cheyenne with orders to investigate reports of intimidation and violence against homesteaders," Marshal Davis replied evenly. "Seems I arrived just in time." The marshal's presence changed the dynamics immediately. Holloway attempted to present his eviction notice, but Davis was unimpressed. "I'll need to verify this with the territorial governor," he stated after examining the document. "Until then, no one's evicting anyone. And I suggest you disperse your men, Mr. Holloway, unless you want to explain to a federal judge why you've assembled an armed posse." Faced with federal authority, Holloway had no choice but to retreat, though the venomous look he cast toward the Lee ranch promised this wasn't over. That evening, Marshal Davis joined the Lees and Griffin for dinner, explaining his presence in more detail. Complaints had reached the territorial governor about Holloway's tactics, and Davis had been dispatched to investigate. "You're not the only rancher he's threatened," Davis explained. "But you're the first to stand up to him so openly. It's drawn attention." "Will that paper he showed us hold up?" Nathaniel asked, concern evident in her voice. Davis shook his head. "Doubtful. Judge Reynolds has been under scrutiny for some time. This may be what finally removes him from the bench." The news brought relief, but Griffin remained cautious. "Holloway doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily, Marshal." "No," Davis agreed, "which is why I'll be staying in the area for a while, and I suggest you all remain vigilant." The Marshal's prediction proved accurate. Though Holloway's men no longer approached the ranch directly, incidents continued: cattle found with mysterious ailments, fences cut in the night, supplies missing from their monthly deliveries in town. But with federal attention on the situation, the violence subsided. As summer gave way to autumn, life on the ranch settled into a new routine. Griffin's shoulder healed completely, and he took on more responsibilities, effectively becoming Jonathan's right-hand man. His relationship with Nathaniel flourished openly now, with Jonathan's tacit approval evident in the way he included Griffin in discussions about the ranch's future. On a crisp October evening, Griffin asked Jonathan for a private word after dinner. They sat on the porch, pipes lit, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. "I expect I know what this is about," Jonathan said after a comfortable silence. "My daughter's been walking around with her head in the clouds for weeks now." Griffin smiled. "Sir, I'd like your blessing to marry Nathaniel. I don't have much to offer her in terms of wealth, but I swear I'll protect her and provide for her as long as I live." Jonathan studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when my wife died, I promised her I'd see Nathaniel settled with a good man before I joined her, someone who'd cherish her spirit rather than try to tame it." He knocked the ashes from his pipe. "I believe you're that man, Griffin." "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." Jonathan clapped him on the shoulder. "Have you asked her yet?" "Not formally. I wanted your blessing first." "Well, you have it, though I suspect her answer has been decided for some time now." 2 days later, Griffin took Nathaniel riding to the spot where he had found her that fateful day in early summer. The plains looked different now, the lush grasses of summer replaced by the golden hues of autumn, but the boulder where she had slumped, wounded and faint, remained. "Why here?" Nathaniel asked as they dismounted. "Not the most romantic spot for a picnic." Griffin took her hands in his. "I disagree. This is where our story began, where I first laid eyes on the most remarkable woman I've ever known." Nathaniel's expression softened. "I was half dead and covered in dust. And still the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen," Griffin insisted, dropping to one knee before her. "Nathaniel Lee, finding you that day changed the course of my life. I don't want to imagine a future without you in it." He produced a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. "Will you marry me? Be my partner, my heart, my home?" Tears filled Nathaniel's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." Their engagement was celebrated with a small gathering at the ranch, attended by neighboring families and the hands who had stood with them against Holloway. Marshal Davis returned for the occasion, bringing news that Judge Reynolds had been removed from office and Holloway's legal claims against the Lee Ranch dismissed. "There's more," Davis added as the celebration continued around them. "Holloway's being investigated for land fraud across 3 territories, his empire's crumbling fast." The news brought a sense of closure, though Griffin remained vigilant. Holloway was a wounded animal now, potentially more dangerous than ever. Their wedding was planned for the spring, after the worst of winter had passed. As the first snows fell, the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the season. Griffin and Nathaniel spent long evenings by the fire, planning their future together. "Father wants to build us a house of our own," Nathaniel mentioned one night as they sat wrapped in a quilt, watching the flames dance. "On the eastern edge of the property." Griffin pulled her closer. "What do you want?" She considered the question seriously. "I want to stay near the main house, at least while Father's health remains uncertain. But someday, yes, I'd like our own home. Room for children to run and play." "Children, hum?" Griffin smiled against her hair. "How many are you thinking?" "At least 2, Nathaniel replied decisively. "Maybe more. I was lonely as an only child." They fell silent, both imagining the family they hoped to create. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in pristine white. The peace was shattered 3 days before Christmas when a ranch hand burst into the house, his expression grim. "Riders coming, looks like Holloway and what's left of his men." Griffin grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace. "How many?" 10, maybe 12. "They're armed and they look determined." Jonathan emerged from his study, his own rifle in hand. "Nathaniel, get to the root cellar, now." But Nathaniel was already checking her revolver. "I'm staying. This is my fight too." There was no time to argue. Griffin positioned himself at a window, Jonathan at another, while Nathaniel took cover behind the heavy oak dining table. The remaining hands spread throughout the house and property, ready for what might be Holloway's final stand. The riders stopped 50 yards from the house. Holloway dismounted, his face haggard compared to when they'd last seen him. The investigation had taken its toll, aging him visibly. "Lee," he shouted, "come out and face me like a man." Jonathan moved toward the door, but Griffin caught his arm. "Let me go, he's desperate and dangerous." "All the more reason it should be me," Jonathan insisted. "He's after my land, my water. This began with me, and it'll end with me." Before either man could move, Nathaniel slipped past them to the porch, her revolver steady in her hand but not raised. "Mr. Holloway," she called, her voice carrying across the snow-covered yard. "Whatever grievance you have with my father, bringing armed men to our home on Christmas Eve won't resolve it." Holloway's expression twisted with rage. "You think you've won, don't you? All of you, the high and mighty Lees and their drifter protector. But I still have enough men to burn this place to the ground with all of you in it." Griffin stepped onto the porch beside Nathaniel, his rifle ready but not aimed. "Think carefully, Holloway. Marshal Davis knows you're a suspect in multiple crimes. Add murder to that list and they'll hang you for certain." "I have nothing left to lose," Holloway snarled, drawing his pistol. "They've taken everything from me, my reputation, my contracts, soon my freedom, but I'll have the satisfaction of seeing you both dead before they take me." He raised his gun toward Nathaniel, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from the direction of the barn. Holloway jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell to his knees. A crimson stain spread across his chest as he toppled forward into the snow. All eyes turned to the source of the shot. Marshal Davis emerged from behind the barn, rifle in hand. "Drop your weapons," he commanded Holloway's stunned men. "Federal Marshal, you're all under arrest." The men, seeing their leader fallen and federal authority present, surrendered without further resistance. As Davis and the ranch hands secured the prisoners, Griffin pulled Nathaniel into his arms, his heart racing with the knowledge of how close he'd come to losing her. "Are you all right?" he asked, searching her face. Nathaniel nodded, though she trembled slightly. "It's over, isn't it? Really over this time?" "Yes," Griffin assured her, looking over her shoulder to where Davis was examining Holloway's body. "It's over." Later, after the prisoners had been taken to town and Holloway's body removed, the household attempted to reclaim the festive spirit that had been so violently interrupted. Jonathan opened a bottle of fine whiskey he'd been saving, and they toasted to peace, to family, and to the future. "Not how I envisioned spending Christmas Eve," Jonathan remarked as they sat before the fire. "But I'm grateful we're all here to see Christmas Day." Griffin raised his glass. "To unexpected blessings," he said, his eyes finding Nathaniel's across the room, "and new beginnings." Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers across the plains, as if nature itself was celebrating the end of winter and the new peace that had settled over the territory. With Holloway gone and his associates facing justice, the Lee Ranch flourished, attracting new settlers to the area who sought the fair water rights Jonathan offered. On a perfect May morning, Nathaniel Lee became Nathaniel Foster in a ceremony held beneath the old oak tree near the creek. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by the town's seamstress, with wildflowers woven through her hair. Griffin, in a new suit purchased for the occasion, watched with wonder as she walked toward him on her father's arm. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying across the gathered friends and neighbors. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Griffin Foster and Nathaniel Lee." The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such genuine emotion that many guests dabbed at their eyes. When Griffin slipped the ring onto Nathaniel's finger, and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up seemed to reach the very clouds above. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the entire county could consume. As the sun began to set, Griffin led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot by the creek. "Happy, Mrs. Foster?" he asked, taking her into his arms. Nathaniel's smile was radiant. "More than I ever thought possible, Mr. Foster." "I have something for you," Griffin said, producing a small package from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Nathaniel unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. Opening it, she found a tiny painted miniature of a horse chestnut-colored, like her beloved Blaze. "To remember where we started," Griffin explained as he fastened it around her neck, "and to remind us how precious each day together is." Tears glistened in Nathaniel's eyes as she touched the locket. "It's perfect, though I hardly need reminding to treasure our days. Each one is a gift I never expected to receive." They returned to the celebration hand in hand, stepping into the future they had fought so hard to secure. 5 years later, Griffin stood on the porch of their home built as promised on the eastern edge of the Lee property, watching as Nathaniel taught their 4-year-old daughter Grace to ride her pony. Their 2-year-old son Jonathan, named for his grandfather, played at Griffin's feet with wooden blocks, occasionally looking up to demand his father's attention. Jonathan Lee himself sat in a rocker nearby, his health improved but his hair now fully white. He watched his grandchildren with undisguised adoration, occasionally offering advice on Grace's riding form that Nathaniel pretended to heed. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. With Holloway's threat removed, they had expanded their operations, breeding horses alongside the cattle business. Griffin's skill with Mustangs had proven valuable, and Foster-bred horses were now sought after throughout the territory. Life wasn't without its challenges: droughts, harsh winters, the everyday trials of ranching in the untamed West. But each obstacle they faced together, the bond between them only strengthening with time. As Griffin watched his wife and daughter laughing in the sunshine, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that fateful day when he found a wounded woman and her dead horse on the plains to this moment of domestic bliss, a path neither of them could have predicted but both now cherished. "Papa, look," Grace called, trotting her pony in a perfect circle. "I did it?" "Well done, sweetheart." Griffin called back, pride swelling in his chest. Nathaniel guided the pony back toward the house, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. She dismounted to help Grace down, then walked to join Griffin on the porch, placing a kiss on little Jonathan's head before rising to embrace her husband. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Griffin smiled, pulling her closer. "Just how fortunate I am, how one decision to investigate a fallen horse changed everything." "For both of us," Nathaniel agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Though I maintain I would have survived somehow." "Of that I have no doubt," Griffin laughed. "But I like to think I made the journey more enjoyable." Nathaniel's eyes sparkled with the same spirit that had captured his heart years ago. "More than enjoyable, Griffin Foster. You made it a grand adventure." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the Foster family gathered on the porch to watch nature's display. Grace climbed into her grandfather's lap. Little Jonathan dozed in Nathaniel's arms, and Griffin wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. In that perfect moment, Griffin remembered his words from long ago about what made a place feel like home: being exactly where you're meant to be, with the people you're meant to be with. Looking at his family, he knew with absolute certainty he had found that place, that feeling, that home. And it had all begun on a summer day with a desperate prayer over a faint young woman. "Don't you dare give up on me now." Neither of them had given up on each other, on their dreams, on the life they'd built together. Through violence and peace, hardship and prosperity, they had persevered, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after the Wild West had been tamed. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nathaniel turned her face up to his. "I love you, Griffin Foster," she whispered. "Today and always." Griffin kissed her softly, grateful beyond words for the woman who had transformed his life. "And I love you, Nathaniel Foster, until the end of my days and beyond." Together they watched the first stars of evening emerge, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else side by side, heart to heart, their love a shelter stronger than any storm.